So I'm very much more on the literary studies side rather than digital humanities, but this is kind of trying to merge the two together, I suppose. The point of adaptation studies and aspects of new media productions. So I'm just going to launch into it. So on the 1st of January in 2012, the works of James Joyce expired, the copyright expired in line with Irish copyright law 75 years after the death of an author. Before this date, Joyce's work was very strictly controlled by the Joyce estate and was rarely engaged in any substantial way with artists who wanted to adapt the material. But in the years since the expiration of copyright in 2012, a wave of various adaptations and adaptation projects have been initiated, and a number of these adaptations are very traditional in nature, but some have sought to bring Joyce's work to new genres that do not conform to conventional literariness. So, new media screen adaptations, what I'm going to talk about today, these adaptations of Joyce's work do have certain limitations. They're not the most progressive, but these projects negotiate a complicated relationship with the original texts, which are really central to the Irish literary canon, and they present alternative versions and experiences which progressively challenge established interpretations and expected modes of engagement with the literature. So there's too many old media adaptations since 2012 to really list at all. They're including plays, books, films, musical productions, and visual art productions, many of which were really prominent at the time of their production. And if you're interested in that, you can have a look at the digital platform for contemporary Irish writing, which is just contemporaryirishwriting.ie, has the Joyce Today project, which lists everything I'm going to talk about today, but also all of the old media adaptations, which were produced between 2012 and 2016, in those 5 years. That was led by Professor Margaret Kelleher in UCD. But what we kind of discovered when we looked at the new media adaptations is the proliferation of productions, of such productions, underlines a central tenet of adaptation theory, as outlined in Linda Hutchin's foundational text on the subject, A Theory of Adaptation. So we're going to start with talking about that, which Hutchin writes that art is derived from other art, stories are born of other stories. It's an essential idea of adaptation. Walter Benjamin, writing on the act of translation in a text, he writes on the act of translation, but it's a text that's long been considered part of or fundamental to adaptation studies, has argued that the good translation is transparent. It does not cover the original, does not block its light, but allows the pure language, as though reinforced by its own medium, to shine upon the original all the more fully. In this, Benjamin suggests the translation, or adaptation for our purposes, functions as the supplement to the original. Pascal Nicholas and Oliver Linder repeat the rationale behind this argument in relation to adaptation when they contend that the meaning of the original will be enriched and reactualized by the adaptation, which in this sense becomes a reanimation of the preceding work. So understanding the adaptation as a supplement is not without problem. Jacques Derrida has interrogated the nature of the supplement to contend that it is considered, or it is to be considered, an adjunct, a subaltern instance which takes the place. As substitute, it is not simply added to the positivity of presence, it produces no relief. Its place is assigned in the structure by the mark of emptiness. So that's kind of the negative side. But at the same time, the simultaneity is important. A terrifying menace, the supplement is also the first and surest protection against that very menace. The supplement transgresses and respects the internet. So Derrida kind of problematizes the idea of what a supplement can actually do, how it challenges and reinforces the importance of the original. So embracing the simultaneity of Derrida's progressively troubling argument vitally undermines the established hierarchical binary which privileges the original text over the adaptation. And understanding this is evidenced in, again, in Nicholas and Linder, when they see the threat the adaptation poses. They argue that it regularly runs counter to the ideas of the connoisseurs of the original. So what supplements or the adaptation is a threat, I suppose, to the original. It's in this context of debates concerning the nature of adaptation and the relationship between the original text and the subsequent adaptations, like a close examination of recent new media adaptations, screen adaptations of the work of Joyce, should be situated. These adaptations have produced as tributes to the original text, have been produced as tributes to the original texts, which acknowledge and respect Joyce's position in the canon of modern literature. But these adaptations also supplement, while engaging with intertextuality, to progressively problematize the relationship between the original texts and the subsequent versions, while the move to screen and to new media underlines the importance of technology to those interested writers appropriating Joyce's work. So, when discussing the idea of new media, I take as a starting point Narvika Balkan's summary of new media. The term new media was defined in 2001 by Ledmanovic in his The Language of New Media as a cultural artifact typically made and presented on the computer and characterized by 5 principles. Number 1, numerical representation of content. Number 2, modular structure of data and algorithms. Number 3, automation of processes. Number 4, variability of the object's existence. And number 5, transcoding of cultural data and practices which are digitized and transferred to the computer, which in turn modifies the operations of society and concepts in media theory. So it's kind of a starting point for new media in this context. From this, Balkan does conclude, a little simplistically, that literature associated with new media typically appears on the rectangular surface of the computer screen as an image of 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional letters and words. There's some problems with that. Nevertheless, it's established from this that the computer and new media are inextricably intertwined. As Paul argues, the lowest common denominator for defining new media art seems to be its computability, the fact that it is computational and based on algorithms. Other descriptive adjectives commonly used for characterizing new media art are process-oriented, time-based, dynamic, and real-time, participatory, collaborative, and performative, modular, variable, generative, and customizable, which is a lot of adjectives in one go. So, as a genre of new media art, electronic literature necessarily shares the reliance on the computer as a practice shaped by digital textuality that foregrounds new media's specificity and new approaches to the issue of writing in programmable media. But as Jessica Pressman explains, electronic literature is born digital, it's computational and processual, dependent upon the operations of the machine for its aesthetic effects. Electronic literature emerges through a series of translations across machine codes, platforms, and networks. Its resulting on-screen content depends on algorithmic procedures, software, hardware, and often internet compatibility. That's all pretty standard for electronic literature. So, keeping in the foundational stuff, N. Catherine Hale's foundational 2007 essay, Electronic Literature, What Is It?, enumerates a number of the emerging genres of electronic literature, and in doing so stresses that just as the history of print literature is deeply bound up with the evolution of book technology, as it built on wave after wave of technical innovations, so the history of electronic literature is entwined with the evolution of digital computers. I think I'm flogging a dead horse here, just to prove the point. This form of literature calls into question the very specificity of literature as we know it, by opening new methods of textual organization, by reflecting on how software conditions our basic understanding of online textuality and literary scripts, and by pointing to the changes caused by the present algorithmic culture. So that's kind of the adaptation theory aspect and the perspective of the new media and electronic literature that I kind of want to use as a kind of structure to frame the discussion of the new media adaptations of Joyce's text. So to go through those, there's a group of 4 which are electronic, what we'll call electronic texts of sorts. The challenge to norms of literature and the primacy of the original text is clearly identifiable in a number of these projects, which in their very nature problematically resist easy classification. These projects often offer versions of the text to suggest that they represent the outcome of digitization of the original text, but they offer supporting detail to inform the reader's experience, and when closely examined, share more in common with aspects of adaptation, which remove the original text from one context to render it in another. Such a reading of these projects underlines their beginning to what's known as the post-literary phase of adaptation. So while backwards looking in their focus on literature in the early 20th century, these projects also reflect the contemporary tension between traditional print and emerging digital forms, which has rendered the idea of the book under pressure and experiencing change. As our social interactions are changing with new communication technologies, so is the book, and we should view this as a positive change. So what's evidenced by these projects is the extent to which formats that we once thought of as fixed and separate, like spoken and written messages, books and games, movies and file cabinets, are being deconstructed into the component parts and reconfigured for interactivity. So the first one I'd like to talk about is The Dead. Launched in 2014, The Dead is an iPad app which features a digitalization of the text of Joyce's short story. Alongside this, users can listen to an audio version, which is a recording featuring the actor Barry McGovern. This audio version repeats the written text of the story entirely, but the use of the famous Irish actor underlines how this recording could be interpreted as an audio adaptation of the text, at the very least, as it moves off the page, and in this case also off the screen in a way. Perhaps more interestingly, though, this app also includes a selection of images of a snow-covered Dublin city from the time the narrative of the story is set. This feature demonstrates an engagement with the user through visual elements, alongside the textual and aural, as it provides enough content to actively inform the user's imagining of the scenes which are described in the text. And this is where adaptation comes in. It interferes and alters the receiver's or the reader's perception of the original. It's through this simultaneous presentation of these various elements that the app may clearly be interpreted as an adaptation, offering a distinctly different experience to the screen-based user than that offered to the reader of the original text. In this context, then, The Dead becomes a somewhat basic version of what's known as an enhanced book. Digital books that not only contain text and illustrations, but also make more use of computational capacities, adding hyperlinks, game, video, and other features. As a screen-based app, then, The Dead moves into this category of new media electronic literature and presents, alongside these versions of the text and the associated images, a selection of commentary and music related to the text. Users are thus able to navigate through a number of items that may offer multiple paths through the entire contents of the app. So it's not linear, it's non-linear, you can go through it in various different ways. Following this, Digital Dubliners, actually published in the same year, was released by Boston College just a few months after The Dead. Digital Dubliners presents itself as a multimedia guided edition of the entire collection of Joyce's Dubliners. It's composed of 300 odd images, 700 or so notes and explanations, 24 videos, critical essays and hyperlinks, interactive maps sourced from contemporary newspaper, sound, film and photographic archives with essays, film, recordings, background and expert discussion. So this really is an enhanced book. It's a book plus in this way. Like The Dead, Digital Dubliners should also be viewed through the prism of adaptation studies. It utilizes the screen and the technology of new media and electronic literature to have a substantial impact on the user's experience of the original Joyce text. The features to guide the reader through what is presented as an authoritative version of the text are in fact supplementary elements. That's where the supplement comes in again, which the user may navigate. And this aspect renders Digital Dubliners a slightly more advanced version of an enhanced book, I suppose. While the app attempts to place a strict, limited context in gathering of information to inform a specific reading of the original literary text, the end product of this app is a piece of new media which offers multiple paths along which the user may follow to engage with material in different patterns. Relevant images are placed alongside the digitized version of the original Joyce text, while scans of historical documents and newspapers are presented as interactive images with explanatory commentary to explain the experience. It's a new adapted version of the original text, basically. There's two more of these. The next one is A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, kind of the same thing again. It's the digital multimedia edition was published in 2016. Like The Dead, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man also features an audiobook. In this publication, though, interestingly, the text is performed by two actors, Barry McGovern again, and his son Sam. In this interpretation of the text, the audiobook creates a new dialogue between Joyce's mature voice and that of his younger remembered self, which is clearly an aural adaptation of sorts. This audiobook accompanies an exact reproduction of the original text, and like The Dead and Digital Dubliners, archival photographs are there from the period, and they're intended to inform or alter the user's perception of the actions of the novel or the stories. The project also offers two features not included in earlier similar works, the first of which is a video displaying dynamic maps of the social networks depicted in each of the novel's 5 chapters, which is quite an interesting development, presenting new ways to analyse the relationship between characters. And secondly, users are also offered a geographic map which identifies the specific real-world locations in Ireland where the actions of the novel take place. One of the most important differences between this project and the earlier one is the format as well. The Dead and Digital Dubliners were both constructed as apps for Apple devices only, which obviously restricts access, but A Portrait of Ulysses Young Man is an open access website which features embedded content such as SoundCloud files. The digitized version of the text can be read on the website itself or downloaded as one of the standard e-reader files in PDF or .mobi or .epub. And as a result of this format, the adaptation is more widely accessible to users and readers, but it's also less dynamic. The primary element of the project, a reproduction of the original text, is static, and it's set up to be experienced in a strictly linear, conventional format. The fourth of these, though, is more interesting, or it's something entirely different, I suppose. This JoyceWays predates all the 3 other projects, and it's the most radical departure from or adaptation of Joyce's texts. It was published on Bloomsday in 2012, and it's often actually considered an app which facilitates tourism. It brings together much of what features in the later projects, but it also dissects Joyce's Ulysses in a fashion which suggests an early engagement with elements of augmented reality. To experience JoyceWays fully, the user must be in Dublin City, either physically, which is the preferred method, or virtually, I suppose, on the app's map. This map hosts more than 100 points of interest to the narrative of Joyce's Ulysses. Once the user discovers these locations on the app, they are given access to audio recordings of excerpts from the original text read by Frank Delaney. This allows users to experience Ulysses in a completely non-linear fashion, offering innumerable journeys through the city and the text as a potentially infinite loop of text, in a sort, rendering accumulating and alternative meanings to this collection of excerpts placed in new contexts. And then accompanying these excerpts at each point of information is a collection of information similar to that provided in later projects, but Nugent also includes guides to 15 real-world Dublin pubs, and he grades each one according to a supposed authenticity ratio, along with other elements of interest to those visiting Dublin City. So you can see the tourist kind of aspect of it. So these are the 4 kind of initial, more conventional adaptations. And when you look at these, the first thing to notice is that their production has been led by academics. Their work facilitated by designers and developers. In this way, these projects are not obvious candidates as objects of new media art, or perhaps even as adaptations, similar to the old media adaptations. The primary goal of these 4 projects appears to be to supplement, that is, to facilitate the understanding of and appreciation of Joyce's work, rather than to take Joyce's texts and render new literary interpretations of the narratives. Yet these projects fulfill one of the primary functions of adaptation, as understood again through Benjamin's description of the role of translation. It allows the pure language, as though reinforced by its own medium, to shine upon the original all the more fully. Read as adaptations in the form of enhanced books, which provide illustrations, images, and all that stuff, they supplement the original text and can be navigated through linear fashion. It can be argued then that these publications represent examples of electronic literature which utilize the screen to challenge the experience of what it's like to read a literary text. And while the nature of these particular projects often seems to focus on contextualizing and shaping the user's or reader's engagement, the individual's experiencing of these multiple elements varies from one user to the next, particularly so in JoyceWays. As a result, these projects underline the manner in which the refashioning of the book through digital technology results in the diminishment of the sense of closure that belonged to codex and print. As adaptations of text central to the canon of modern Anglophone literature, it sets a clear challenge to the manner in which texts are engaged with and the critical pursuit for closed, singular meaning of literary criticism. Moving on then to a second group of new media adaptations, and this is where it gets a little bit more progressive. The aspects of virtual reality are embraced. While the electronic texts I've introduced so far exemplify the manner in which enhanced books may challenge central tenets of the norms of reading and associated literary criticism, or the post-literary phase of adaptation has moved beyond the text on the screen. And this is evident in the extent to which the book's social function as the high-status vehicle for communicating new ideas and cultural expressions is being challenged by sophisticated systems of conveying meaning in other media. Non-textual new media projects which move further beyond the format of the book encapsulate this shift, and this may be made even more powerfully explicit in such projects that are adaptations which practically move the text away from the printed word on the book to the new form of reality that is virtual. The step from electronic literature and the enhanced book to virtual reality is not as great as might be expected, particularly in relation to Joyce adaptations. As Christiane Paul explains, the potentially interactive and participatory nature of new media projects which allow people to navigate, assemble, or contribute to an artwork in a way that goes beyond the interactive mental event of experiencing it runs counter to the basic rule of museums. Many works of new media art do not only require active engagement, but a certain familiarity with interfaces and navigation paradigms. This familiarity with navigation paradigms is necessary for receivers of new media projects, as clearly evident in the enhanced books, where the navigation involves just the simple use of hyperlinks to move through pages in the apps or the website. Those navigation is conducted at a distance as the user manipulates the screen through limited input. Either a digit for a touchscreen or a mouse or a keyboard. So while engagement with the navigation of such electronic literature conventionally requires some form of physical engagement, this is relatively minimal. As Geoffrey Shaw explains, though, the trajectories of interactive art exemplify a complex set of negotiations between body and space, negotiations between the actual domain of the real body of the viewer and the real space she inhabits, and the virtual domain of the represented body and the represented spaces. As such art, utilizing new media expands and develops, it requires two basic components. Dynamic components, changes happening over time and interaction in general, and with dynamic components. Both of these function to liven the environment and to make it more interesting, particularly over longer periods of time. In this shift of emphasis, the reader, or in this case the user, becomes a less passive receiver and more of an active participant through the use of virtual reality. This impacts the user's experience, but it also necessitates a re-evaluation of the nature and functioning of literary narrative, as the interactive physical nature of this kind of engagement entails changes both in the story and even in the importance of the story itself. So as a result, it's necessary to recognize the manner in which virtual reality is a specific narrative medium, alongside other narrative forms such as theatre, literature, or cinema. Regarding the user's experience, characteristic of VR is that the role of the subject, i.e. the user, to whom the narrative is communicated, is, in terms of interaction, active in the unfolding of the narrative as opposed to its passive role in most of the other classical narrative media, that is the spectator. This change in dynamic reflects an important development in new media art, the creation of platforms of exchange between the artwork and audience. Marie-Laure Ryan describes the experience of a virtual reality user can expect. A few of us have actually donned a HMD and TGs and entered a computer-generated three-dimensional landscape in which all of our wishes can be fulfilled. Wishes such as experiencing an expansion of our physical and sensory powers, getting out of the body and seeing ourselves from the outside, adopting a new identity, apprehending immaterial objects in most of our senses, including touch, being able to modify the environment through either verbal commands or physical gestures, seeing creative thoughts instantly realized without going through the process of having them physically materialized. This experience necessarily has a considerable impact then on the artist's construction of narrative. The participation of users is both pursued and, to a certain extent, feared. So, understandings of narrative as static and fixed must then be challenged, as user-engaged new media art forms such as virtual reality, which represents a dynamic process resulting from the interaction between characters and its impact on the user. As Hutchins suggests, again going back to adaptation theory, being shown a story is not the same as being told it. and neither is the same as participating in it or interacting with it. That is, experiencing a story directly and kinesthetically. Ryan notes the importance of this understanding when she writes that while narrativity is a type of meaning, interactivity, when put in the service of entertainment, is a type of play. The combination of narrativity and interactivity oscillates between two forms: the narrative game, in which narrative meaning is subordinated to the player's actions, and the playable story, in which the player's actions are subordinated to narrative meaning. So the distinction between the narrative game and the playable story is particularly relevant then in relation to adaptations of a literary text. When the user actually becomes one of the characters in a fictional world, which has been constructed with the sole intention to present a new version of a narrative which originated in printed text, interactivity and dynamism is important, but the user must presume that their freedom is relatively curtailed to be safely subsumed within the narrative of the original text. So, to date, 2 projects have been undertaken to produce adaptations of Joyce's Ulysses, specifically for virtual reality. Both of these present the adaptation of a heterocosm, an other world or cosmos, complete, of course, with the res extensa, to use Descartes' terminology, of that world as a material, physical dimension, which is transposed and then experienced through multisensual interactivity. Despite sharing this practical goal, I suppose, the rationale behind both projects seems to be very different. And I'll finish with these 2. The first is in Ulysses. Antics VR, the name of the company, first sought to crowdsource funding for in Ulysses in 2014 and have released 2 prototype videos to date based on the first sections of Joyce's Ulysses. The second of these prototypes, along with more complete files to be downloaded from the website, provide virtual reality simulations for use with the Vive and the Oculus Rift. Described as a virtual reality video game, the material so far released indicates the user occupies the identity of Stephen Dedalus, the central figure, and travels along a rather predetermined path. As the user proceeds through a series of specific locations, the text from Joyce's original novel appears on the screen. I think you might be able to see that in the picture on the right there. The text itself appears on the screen as you're walking along the strand. At the same time, there's an audio recording of those words playing as you meet each segment of text. So you're kind of put into the position of Stephen Dedalus and his consciousness as he's going through his thought patterns. So in Ulysses presents itself very clearly then as an educational tool, which is quite limiting. Similar to the enhanced books that I've already talked about, the primary purpose of this virtual reality adaptation appears to be to facilitate the readers or users' further understanding of and engagement with the original literary text. One of the interactive ideas central to the project appears to be the ability to stop the progress of the narrator, to explore the virtual reality illustrations. That is, that you can go forward, you're expected to go forward in a linear fashion, but you can also go backwards, and you can engage with the text. It's still linear, but at least it's backwards linear, I suppose. So limited, but has some benefit. The second VR project is called Joycestick. This is much further along in the process. In Ulysses, the Antics VR has stumbled, we'll say. There's limited dynamic interactivity with the environment in Ulysses, but this is a key feature in Joycestick. This was debuted as an exhibition in 3 locations last summer, but the project is still under development, but it's on a much larger scale than the Antics VR. There's a large interdisciplinary team at Boston College, again led by Professor Joseph Nugent, and they're producing a program which places much less emphasis on functioning as a learning aid and much more on what is described as a gamification of Joyce's text. Joycestick seeks to gain considerably more from the new media virtual reality as it balances providing the user with gameplay tasks with the development of the narrative. And brief video clips released online show the user inhabiting the position of Leopold Bloom in the Calypso section of the novel. At this point, I'm going to hope that we have audio. I will just play this brief clip to show you the difference. You can see the gameplay aspect of it. Maybe not. But you're getting the general.
Inner organs of beasts and fowls.
So that's the narrative of the text.
Giblets soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hair.
That's gameplay.
Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidneys, which gave to his palate a fine tang of faintly scented yogurt. Jane liked air with passion, but out of doors, gentle summer rain made him feel no pinch. Let's cook that kidney. Find the butter and pepper on top of the table. Place the pan first.
So they've broken through the omniscient narrator there and given instructions for the gameplay in that case. And the narrator won't progress until you complete the actions of the gameplay.
Cook the moist, tender gland in the butter. Placing first the butter, and then the kidney in the pan, and the pepper on top.
That's the task successfully completed. Now we return to the narrative.
Follow the pussies. Ah, the male. A certain admirer has called for the wife. Oh, that was the letter from. He's bringing the telegram. And what are you saying?
Let's hear with Joyce Today.
Sweet song. Smell good. Straight up from the fire. Maybe not such a gentle one. Where's my hat, by the way?
So that's around. So we've got that aspect. It kind of develops for anyone else isn't too familiar with this. The idea of Molly is having an affair with Boylan. So it introduces all of these themes at this part. But you can see yourself the idea of gameplay being integral to the progression of the narrative. So moving on, and just to. So just to conclude then, I suppose, with that idea, that Ryan explains that in a narrative game, the player plays to win, to beat the game, and the story is mostly a lure into the game world. In a playable story, there is no winning or losing, though. The purpose of the player is not to beat the game, but to observe the evolution of the story world. And that's kind of what we have in Ulysses and in Joycestick. All signs clearly indicate that they'll function as playable stories, allowing the narrative to be developed with relatively little interference, as the user is relatively controlled, except you can throw things around the room, I suppose. This is the limitation of their engagement with the potential new media offers to narrative forms, but it is also connected closely to the challenges of virtual reality. What Bloom and Beckhouse concluded that the promise of everything and anything in virtual reality has never really come to fruition. The realizable possibilities are much more constrained than the imagination of almost any of us. Part of this is that we do not yet have an understanding of what the virtual environment, the center point of VR, is and can be. And as a result of that, we're going to remain limited. So, while Joycestick is considerably more technologically advanced than in Ulysses and offers far more freedom to the user to explore the text, both are ultimately servants to the master narrative. These programs then represent top-down systems meant for a single traversal. The story does not change or renew itself. There is a start point and an end point. The benefits of engaging with the process of adaptation through this media, through new media, far outweigh any such narrative limitations, though. potential anyway. In these multimodal adaptations, meanings are made as well as distributed, interpreted, and remade through many representational and communicational resources, of which language is but one. Consequently, the employment of a variety of modes for the presentation of content through different modes may therefore provide the accessibility that a single mode cannot offer. And that, I suppose, is what I'll conclude with, that such adaptations can represent a liberation of the text from its printed form, and it can foreground alternative perspectives, readings, and modes of engagement with Joyce's text. Thanks very much.
Anyone else? Going once, going twice. All right, I would like to thank Dr. Keating again for a wonderful presentation. And I will see you all here next week, same time. Thank you.